Pope Francis used that term. He says this is an exciting technology, but also a fearsome technology. So it's okay to have that fear, but that fear sometimes comes from ignorance. So if we can defeat ignorance, then we have a chance to move from something that could be potentially harmful to something that could be really harnessed for good.
Edmundo and Edmund, it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with both of you today. Just kind of starting out, I know that both of you come from strong ministry backgrounds. Edmund, I know that you worked in parish ministry for quite a while. Edmundo, I know on the diocesan level in Detroit, you worked in communications. If you guys could share for our audience who might not know so much about you guys, how did those experiences shape how you see technology's role in the church today? And maybe Edmundo, we can start with you.
Well, thank you so much, Benjamin. I'm so happy to be here and with Edmund as well. He's a close collaborator and a friend, and yeah, we're happy to be here. Yeah, that's a great question. So I was in college during the digital revolution, the first one. So I got to witness firsthand the excitement around technologies. We would call them emerging technologies at that time, and in fact, I was studying economics and I switched to communications because of the excitement that I had with these new technologies. And it just sounds funny now when you say new technologies, emerging technologies, and you're referring to the internet and email. But it was like mind blowing. It was the time where just things were changing and very, very quickly. So at that time, I was 17 years old. I had a powerful encounter with the Lord. I went to this retreat and had a very, very powerful encounter with the Lord. And I felt called to be at the intersection of technology and media and evangelization from the very, very beginning. So that's been always part of who I am and what I do with my career. And I've been very blessed to be able to serve the Lord in that intersection. So at that time, again, I was young. I was looking at all these technologies, and one of the things that it was always so encouraging to me was the approach of the church. That it was never, it was always providing wisdom on how to navigate this changing world, but it was always very hopeful. It was about how can we use these technologies to advance the mission of Christ in the world, and that was a type of framework that was reinforced in me at a very early age of always thinking about technologies and emerging technologies and media as a tool that we can harness for good and for the mission of the church. There are obviously things that we need to be careful about, and we need to use our discernment. But that was always the voice of the church from the very, very beginning. We're talking about mid-90s, and it continued until now with different things that the popes and the magisterium are the church magisterium is teaching us on how to navigate these and how to be careful about it. So. But it's always been like that. It's always been in my heart, the desire to leverage technology and media to evangelize. At the heart of it is, the gospel is a story. It's the best story that can be told, the best story that has ever been told and can be told. And I always wanted to use media and leverage media to tell that story to the world.
Edmund, if you could share a little bit about your background and how your experience working in parish ministry has informed how you see technology being utilized and harnessed by the church.
Yeah, I had 10 years in parish ministry experience, and I started out as a youth minister. So for me, that meant having a pretty tight budget and having to wear a lot of different hats. So when you're in that situation and you're kind of brave enough to experiment with different tech or software tools and things like that, that was definitely something I did. And so I think it shaped me by, on the one hand, like teaching me how to be, I guess, scrappy and test things. But I think it also showed me that, the technology is like, if I'm working on something the night before and then I'm in front of people the next day, it's very quick to figure out like what works and what doesn't with people, And so I think it helped me always place like the person at the center of any technology or thing, software or app that we were using. If it's not going to be helpful for ministry to other people, then it just gets thrown out really quickly. So I think those two things, there was a lot of testing, experimenting, and then just seeing what worked and what didn't. And I think I still kind of have that mentality with the different tech and tools that I use today.
What can you share about your experience, in parish ministry and working, with young adults, with adults, and of course, with younger people? Like, has technology become something central to almost every interaction, or are there certain core interactions, core aspects of that ministry that even if we'd like to offload it to technological, efficiency or whatever, like it is centered around the people and that community?
Yeah, I mean the technology. I mean it's what is it? There's the Marshall McLuhan quote about fish didn't discover water. It's just such a part of our culture that even if you have teens or parishioners who aren't actively power users of technology, the whole culture is or has been impacted by technology and these tools and these inventions. So yeah, it was a part of everything. And I'm sure both of you have heard so many stories of different parishes or ministries or even ministers who kind of looked back lovingly on the days before all of these technological inventions, and then they kind of got left behind in the sense that it was really hard to communicate. It was hard to relate to people who this is part of their whole world. They might be with the church 1 or 2 hours a week, and then all the other hours are spent in a culture and a society. Technology isn't just a part of that society. It like is society. Like it's such a core part of the fabric of what we experience day to day.
And then Edmundo, maybe to jump to you, the late Pope Benedict XVI spoke about the digital continent and the need to evangelize that continent. And Pope Francis, of course, spoke a lot about evangelizing online, using even the term digital continent. Where do you think we are as a church? Are we pioneers on the digital continent? Are we settlers? Are we still tourists? What's your gauge on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that phrase from Pope Benedict because it helps us think in missionary terms, right? In our duty to carry a message of hope, a message of life, right, into a place. Interestingly, the church has evolved in the way that they talk about digital in general. With Pope Benedict, we got that phrase of the digital continent. Again, I think it's very helpful in many ways, and I love it so much. But you see it change from then to Pope Francis, and now with Pope Leo, where the church understands it a little bit different, and more along the lines of what Edmund was saying. They use the digital culture instead of digital content more now in church documents. So it kind of makes sense if you think of it. Pope Benedict and that generation, and I'm part of that generation too, even JP2, we were immigrants, right, coming into these digital continents, right? We were it wasn't something that we grew up with, but we had to learn how to be in it. And then you have millennials and younger, right, who are digital natives. And the church speaks about these two groups of digital migrants and digital natives. But for digital natives, as Edmund was saying, this is everything they know. And it's not like you can opt in or opt out. It's just part of the culture. It's part of where we are. So good things about the concept of a digital continent is the idea of being missionaries, of knowing that we are going into a foreign place to bring the gospel message, a message of hope and life that people need to hear. So that's super helpful. The digital culture language helps us understand that is not something that we can avoid, but this is where we're immersed. And this is what people are experiencing. It's part of their ecosystem, their ecology that they are a part of. So that's a more nuanced concept, where regardless on your use of technology, you could be a heavy user or not, in terms of digital tools, you're still part of this new digital culture. Good news is that the gospel, the good news, are truly good news, and this is what people desire and crave. I find it very interesting. You see all the data from this year in terms of the interest in the Catholic faith, that has been registered in Google searches and so forth. it coincides with this new digital revolution connected to artificial intelligence. So we see two things happening here. We see the increase in curiosity for the faith, and then we see a world that is becoming more and more technologically complex and advanced. So we see the two things happening. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's connected. I think as people are more and more part of this digital culture, there is a desire for true encounter with God and true understanding of what what we are as humans. So I see the two of them very much connected. So for me, this is a springtime of evangelization. This is the continuation of Second Vatican Council and all those promises, so 50 plus years after, I think this is a time where we're going to see a lot of opportunity in the church because of these technological changes and what they bring to our culture and the questions that they pose.
How do you see AI helping parishes serve people better?
Well, I mean, I think part of the problem right now is that we're not seeing a lot of parishes using AI, but I think, one of the really, one of the strengths of AI is its ability to take lots of information and synthesize it, organize it, things like that. So I think the first thing I come to when I'm talking to someone who's not super familiar with AI, but is in ministry, is not what they would expect. They would expect, often people go and try to use AI and they just type in like, write my email for me or something like that. But there's so many other tools that can take information. For example, Notebook LM is one that I refer to a lot because you're able to upload lots of information. You could, 10 church documents or a bunch of catechetical resources, and then organize that information in interesting ways. So especially moving into the age of AI, information is not the end all be all anymore, the valuable thing. It's more like the medieval times, right? It's how you combine information, like we said at the beginning, like to be useful to other people. So there's lots of ways that AI makes quick organization and accuracy and things like that really useful. Edmundo talks a lot about this. Really shifted my entire worldview on just ministry in general. Talks a lot about the difference between like mission support and mission direct. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities in the mission support category for behind the scenes, analyzing data, getting more accurate information, and then also like personalizing how someone like the minister or someone being ministered to like accesses that information and data. So that's often the first thing I turn to, because it's a lot easier to kind of wrap your head around, is this like organizing, processing information in more useful ways.
And Edmundo and Edmund, could you guys break down what is mission support and mission direct?
Edmundo, go for it.
Yep, happy to do that. When I was working at the Archdiocese of Detroit, we came up with this system, or the Archbishop came up with this system or framework to think about the work that we do as a diocese, as a local church. And we had this kind of division of labor, right? We have the mission support area, and then we have the mission direct area. But mission support are all those, for us, we're departments, but functions, that's probably the best way to think about that are not doing mission directly. They're not impacting mission, but they are supporting mission, or they're slowing down mission, or making mission less effective. So that would be areas like finance, HR, technology, that they are not necessarily ministry, but if done well, you can really enhance ministry. So for mission support areas, what you want to look for are efficiencies, right? How can we do these in a better way, faster way, so that we can free up resources, both monetary resources, but also time, to do more mission. And the mission direct area is everything that we do as a church that is the mission. So that would be Catholic schools and the ministry that we have, and teaching children and teaching adults to the work that we do, evangelization in the parishes, all the sacramental component of a parish. So that would be the mission direct. And in those, you really you're not looking for efficiencies as much as effectiveness. Are we are we doing mission in a way that is accomplishing our goal, that people know and love the Lord, that they can encounter Jesus? So when we have this division, there's efficiencies in one side, which is the most important part of it, and effectiveness on the other side of things. And both are connected. You need efficiency and effectiveness in both areas, but it just allows you to think differently about ministry. So when I think about artificial intelligence, it's like a no-brainer to incorporate artificial intelligence in all of the mission support areas in a parish or in a diocese, because you want to free up resources. You want to have the ability to invest those resources in other things that are mission direct, time and people, personnel, and also monetary resources. So that's a no-brainer. When it becomes more of a where people need a lot of more wisdom and discernment is on the mission direct. How do you incorporate AI on the mission direct? And I think that's where there's a lot of concerns, I would say, from the local churches and priests, pastors, lay ecclesial ministers, and lay leaders. That's where we're trying to figure out how to do it. There are frameworks to think about that, and we can talk about it here, that can move you from fear to confidence, and from fear to hope in this age. But that's, I think, where the big conversation is happening right now, and where people are concerned about it. And I think, sadly, part of the problem is that people are not talking about it openly, because I think that it's more like, you're an AI user, but you don't want to tell people because you're going to be seen as not putting people at the center and not having the human flourishing and the human person at the center. So you're kind of doing it, but isolated, instead of having learning communities where we're talking about how to do these in a way that advances the mission of the church. So I think that there's a need for a greater conversation and openness about how do we use this technology for good. And that's, I need to find the exact quote, but what stuck with me is that these are like talents, when we talk about the parable of talents that have been provided, in God's providence, have been available to us. And then we need to think about how to use them for mission. So I encourage a greater conversation in parish settings and diocesan settings for how do you incorporate AI on these mission direct. And mission support, it should be all about implementation, like best practices. I mean, companies are doing that. Like that's an easy win for a lot of parishes. And if you think of parishes, you're thinking about entities that have limited resources. I love the definition of a pastor as someone who is overwhelmed, understaffed, and underfunded. And that's a reality for most of the pastors. So incorporating AI and mission support should be a given. Now the fun conversation, the interesting conversation, is how do we incorporate it into a mission?
I have sensed that feeling that a lot of people are using it, but they don't want to say it. And I think that with more honesty, that would be a beautiful thing, which is obviously what we want to do with Catholic Futurist. But Edmund, I think for a lot of our viewers, and myself included, I don't know that much about what goes into organizing a parish.
Everyone in the parish boundary is a member of that Catholic parish, meaning that everyone, Catholic or non-Catholic, is part of that parish boundary, which means that's that pastor's responsibility on behalf of the bishop and Jesus to evangelize, to make disciples, to give the sacraments. So then the pastor goes, man, there are tons and tons of people in this parish boundary. Well, there are Catholics that show up for worship, and they're part of the Christian community, and hopefully they are also involved in this task of evangelization in the parish boundary. But again, like in today's day and age, these parishes are rather large. Even the smallest parishes that you could think of, it is hard for the pastor to be available for all of his people at all times. And so, decades ago, there was this, more formalized movement of formalizing positions of volunteers who voluntarily get involved in the mission of that local church. And then we started seeing the professionalizing of these roles as, this laity got more and more educated, as they get more training, they get more formalization around that, which is a great thing. So you have in lots of dioceses parishes that have some level of paid staff, although admittedly it varies widely. Like there are parishes that have very few paid staff. So to avoid getting too much into like the canonical and theological aspects of it, like what goes into the parish is the pastor and either, paid staff or a combination of paid staff and volunteers, like cooperating with the laity to accomplish God's plan for our salvation in this local area. So there's kind of those three areas. You have the pastor, the laity, and then the geographic location, the mission territory. There's other things involved as well, but like focusing on that for our conversation here, like that's really the basic elements that we're talking about when we talk about this parish community. And I think most parishes don't spend enough time thinking about the people that don't show up, especially in the U.S. church, if we're talking in particular about that. Because for so many years we had this assumed cultural religiousness or assumed cultural Catholicness. And so lots of people talk about, people leaving the church and the Catholic Church in droves. And so there really is this, we've gone from, there's a book from Chrysostom to Apostolic Mission. And I believe is the name of the book, but it's this idea that like we no longer live we live in a post-Christian civilization and culture. So there really is this pressing need, as the popes recently have talked about this, the past couple popes, like this need for this new evangelization, this re-evangelization of our parish boundaries. And so like Edmundo, I love Edmundo said, like we would be disappointed, we'd be embarrassed if we don't use the tools that we need. In youth ministry circles, this came up a lot. There'd be this kind of shame of like, well, Jesus didn't use PowerPoint or Jesus didn't have to use slick t-shirts or whatever. And I remember sometimes I would just quip like, yeah, Jesus didn't have PowerPoint, graphic design, or toilet paper. I would like to use toilet paper. Who among us would give up toilet paper? Like it doesn't mean that the things he did not use is a normative rule that he's imposing on us. So anyway, so that's kind of what actually was really exciting for me, was being in these places that Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium talked about. These can be like places of great creativity precisely because of their flexibility and their localness and the way that the people there can be plugged into the local culture and community.
What opportunities do you see that aren't being taken on a practical level, where you look at a diocese or a parish and be like, okay, I see the opportunities, but the staff is not using this tech, or they're not seeing how they could make their life easier in this way. And technology is really built for that.
We need to create a framework where people can have, in a safe and productive way, these conversations. So the leadership needs to provide that framework or that sandbox for people to feel comfortable and safe to be able to experiment and be creative and use these technologies for good. So the question shouldn't be how can we protect ourselves from this technology, but how do we use this technology to facilitate human lives so that we can spread the gospel, to build community, to witness for Christ. So that's the type of spirit that we should have, not one about defending ourselves from these fearsome technology. Pope Francis used that term. He says this is an exciting technology, but also a fearsome technology. So it's okay to have that fear, but that fear sometimes comes from ignorance. So if we can defeat ignorance, then we have a chance to move from something that could be potentially harmful to something that could be really harnessed for good. So providing a framework, I think, should be the most important thing. And I think the Vatican is going to come with a document. I think Pope Leo is working on something that's going to help us. But even if you look at the things that are out there already, you can come up with that framework. So using, so Pope Leo already wrote the World Day Communications message that is going to be published next year in 2026 in February 24th in the Feast of St. Francis of Sales, I believe. But it's always published before, or it's made public now. So even if you take some of that message about preserving human voices and faces and other documents, you can start putting together a framework that creates these safe sandbox for us to creatively advance the mission of the church. So just things that come to mind that could be part of that framework. Human dignity needs to be at the center and it's not negotiable. So we can evaluate a technology with simple questions. Does this uplift human dignity or is it diminishing it? Right? So there's a way for us to create that safe sandbox by asking these type of questions. The tools that we're talking about with AI, they provide efficiency and reach, but they cannot and can never replace the things that are uniquely human. That's what Pope Leo was saying, right? Empathy, ethics, moral responsibility, pastoral care, discernment. Those are the things that need to remain human. Another thing could be, that technology is not an idol, right? Like that's the other part that we see in the documents that the church has published, right? In Antiqua and Nova, that technology can become this false god for humanity, that we can see technology as saving everything that needs to be saved in a parish or in a diocesan setting. Well, we shouldn't have that approach, but we can see it as a tool that can serve us, and it's always serving us. We're never technology is never the master, and then the goal is to facilitate pastoral encounters. So those are just a few things. I think maybe another thing that comes to mind in terms of creating a sandbox or a framework is what Pope Francis would call the wisdom of the heart, right? That machines can process data, but it takes the human heart to process meaning and to discern. So discernment is something that needs to be kept there. So if you create that sandbox in a diocesan setting, in a conference, setting, in a parish setting, then people can be encouraged to creatively use these technologies for good. Here are some things that the other day, Edmund and I were talking about these, and then we came up with some use cases that could be something that parishes could consider. I'm going to share 3 that come to mind that I would think are pretty safe for parishes to implement and consider in these learning communities. So one would be, catechists. Like, Edmund and I have a project around the catechism, and the project's goal is to unlock the wisdom and the beauty, that we have in the catechism of the Catholic Church. But the reality is that a lot of the catechists in a parish, they don't have the formation that sometimes they require. They have some formation, but sometimes it's not sufficient. These are volunteers who have busy lives and are serving out of love for the parish. So if we can equip them with ways that they can leverage AI to prepare their lessons, that would be a super helpful thing. So teaching them how to use AI, not to write the lesson, but to make it better, to adapt some of the materials for the age group that they're teaching, that would be super helpful. So a simple thing that they could do is just write your lesson, right? Like usually parishes provide guides or curriculum for every lesson. Write your lesson, and then ask ChatGPT or other AI tools, to with some framework and with some context, and that's what the parish should provide. How do I adapt these in the best way possible for an audience of boys, 6th grade boys? How do I adapt that here? Using this framework, can you tell me what things I can do better in my lesson? So those are just things that parishes cannot provide that personalized coaching for every catechist in the parish, but they can provide that framework, and they can provide that way of using AI to help the catechist become a better catechist. That doesn't substitute the prayerful spirit of a catechist, of seeking the Lord first. It doesn't substitute the discernment. That person still needs to discern and to make the decisions. And it doesn't replace the catechist, because we need the catechist teaching children or teaching adults and passing down the faith person to person. So we're not replacing anything. We're just elevating and make ministry better. So that's just one example. I can share others. Edmund has a lot of good examples that he can share as well.
Edmund, before I go to the next question, is there anything you'd like to add on that? I mean, those frameworks and those examples, I think really illustrate well kind of the opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think to add, Edmundo shared a lot of these really practical things. I think the biggest thing I am most excited about is that what we're seeing in AI, not just the technology and what it's doing, but what we're seeing is a whole shift, I think, in my view, in our collective view of the world. So for hundreds of years now, since really the Enlightenment, we've been viewing the world across all different subjects and domains, science, religion, philosophy. In the West, there's been this predominant view of the world, which is that the world is like a machine. It's mechanistic, it's linear, it's cause and effect. And it's interesting that in the church, as well as in the sciences, over the last couple decades, we've started to see the breakdown of that. And I think, like Western civilization saw at the height of the fruit of this kind of like materialistic, reductionistic, linear view that you can just understand things as parts, and you put in this and you get out this output. And it just isn't sustainable. It doesn't match with reality. And so like World War II and all of these like fruits of this view of the world. And so we're seeing like this move towards more ecological ecology systems view of the world, which actually is very Catholic. Like the human person is only understood in relation to others. So the thing I'm like really excited about is this deeper worldview shift that AI forces us to have, because there's this thing called the realization gap. Jeremy Utley from Stanford University did this research where he found that lots of people that used AI, there was a big majority of people that they considered underperformers. So they didn't get anything out of AI. And then they examined and surveyed the people that were overperformers who tended to get more results. And the difference between the two groups was that the people who were underperformers viewed AI as a tool, whereas the people who were overperformers viewed AI as a thinking partner. And this really highlights like this difference in worldview of how you interact with things. So for example, a parish, someone as a parish leader or pastor who's very linear, top-down type of approach to leadership is like, if I do X, then Y happens. But we know that just isn't the case. These are complex organizations. These are complex systems. And so a system you can't control, you can only cultivate. So I think what's really exciting, what people are going to be forced to do more and more, is to think of the parish and evangelization much less like a machine to control, like you put in these inputs and you should get out this thing, and much more like in a sense a garden. Like you cultivate a garden. You have to work with a garden. It's interesting too that with the rise of this idea, which is called complexity science, with the rise of this idea in the sciences, we have the rise of synodality in the church. And one of the big tenets of complexity theory is that you have to be sensing what's going on, discerning, responding, and facilitating. And that sounds much more like a synodal church. It sounds much more like accompaniment. And so Catholic leaders have to think of themselves less as someone who transfers the data or the content, and much more as a thinking partner with those that we're ministering to, as someone who mentors and accompanies and is alongside. And it's interesting to know that like Pope Leo in his address to Catholic digital missionaries said this specifically, like it's not simply a matter of generating content, but of creating an encounter of hearts. And so we have to do away with this old model that we've been given, even in our schooling, our education systems, this industrial view of man and of society, that it's a machine, it's linear, and it's much more systems. It's people interacting, listening, and cultivating, and looking at the fruits of that. So that's like a little bit deeper and more nerdy answer, but I think AI forces people to have to think in this more holistic way about the outcomes that they're trying to achieve.
How do you guys see parishes kind of adapting their approach to welcome kind of these people who are digitally converted, intellectually converted through the new media?
I find it super interesting that people open up with ChatGPT and other chatbots so much more than with people. So for some people that would be super scary and like, oh man, like the world is ending because someone opens up so much to a machine instead of a person. Like, you guys may have seen that graphic, that meme where it's like an iceberg, and here's what I tell my friends, here's what I tell my spouse, here's what I tell my therapist, and here is all that I tell ChatGPT. There's something there that I think we should all be reflecting. So if I would be a priest, if I'm even an older priest that doesn't quite understand everything about AI, I should be very curious about that. I should be thinking deeply about that. that reality that we have right now, where especially young people are opening up so much with ChatGPT, right? We've seen that the number one use is not search, it's therapy, right? That people are going to a chatbot to get therapy, and therapy is a search for what? For understanding ourselves and understanding relationships. So that should be something to reflect on, regardless if you touch or not AI. That should really drive your curiosity and start asking very, very important questions. Why someone is so much more open to share deeply there than in a context where there's human encounter and divine encounter, right? And then what can we learn, or are these technologies providing that we're not providing in the church? And what comes to mind is the whole idea of listening, right? I mean, the reason why people share in ChatGPT, yes, there is the I'm embarrassed to talk to someone about this thing with someone else, but it's this idea that ChatGPT is trained and other chatbots to be very empathetic and very affirming and very welcoming to your inquiries, and they provide always positive feedback when you ask a question. They're trained to do that, and then they suggest things and paths. So for someone that may not have a pastoral, training, you can start thinking about why this is happening there. Why are young people, especially, using the technology in this way, and what can we learn in the church, and where can we step up? And also, it's not terrible, right? If someone has a question that they don't feel comfortable sharing with anyone else, and if we can point them to a technology where they can ask those questions, like Magisterium or Truthly, or some of these tools that are trained in churches teaching, and they're getting some answers, that's not the end of the world. It's actually a positive thing that people are finding a way to look for those things. And honestly, that's not that different from what people were doing before, which is just asking Google, right, for the same type of questions. So, but the difference between Google and AI is that the way that the machine responds is so empathetically, and is listening to you, that you open up, right? So if I would be a pastor, it's like I would be praying and discerning, and how can we become a more listening community? How can we create spaces where people can ask questions and not feel judged by them, but that we can welcome them and guide them? How can we provide those opportunities for that personal encounter that leads to the divine encounter? So for me, that's a really, really important conversation to have in a church setting. Here's another thing that comes to mind, and none of us wants a priest to write their homilies, have ChatGPT write their homilies, right? That doesn't make sense, right? And maybe there are some priests that are doing it, but that doesn't mean that you cannot use these tools to become a very better homilist, right? If I would be a priest or a deacon, I would be recording all my homilies, and I would be loading them to an AI tool, and I would be asking critical questions about my preaching. I would be asking questions, feedback with some constraints and context. I would be asking the AI tool. I would be providing the AI tool certain frameworks to use. Okay, use these homiletic framework, right? That is the one that I was trained when I was a seminary. Use these homiletic resources, and now I provide feedback to my preaching. And I want to tell you also that the constraints and the context involve my community. So I am in a suburban parish, or I'm in a rural parish, and the average age is these, and the education level is these, and primarily, this is a type of this is my community, my parish community. And then allow the tool to using these things and analyzing, as Edmund was saying at the very early in the podcast, the power to do those things as a pocket data scientist, and then provide feedback to you that you're not going to do everything that AI tells you, but it's gonna make you think deeply about your ministry, with the hope that in your 40s to grow as a better homilist, so that the word of God that you're preaching could be done in a more effective way.
And I just wonder, how we as Catholics can effectively be preserving that Christian moral formation for these young people as the technology is allowing inputs from outside.
We often revert back to this thing that we learned that's baked into our culture, which is this this kind of Protestant Reformation era view of what evangelization and even the faith really is, that it's an intellectual pursuit, and it's not an intellectual pursuit. And this is why Cardinal Ratzinger, then Pope Benedict, and JP2 and all of these influential thinkers were moving towards this ressourcement to the sources, not just because they needed to reclaim tradition, but because they needed to reclaim a more complete view of the human person. And so I love Aquinas and my Thomistic brothers and sisters in Christ. Like I love them. And as someone who's a recovering Catholic intellectual, like I had to unlearn some of those habits of treating the faith as intellectual pursuit. And I think in a lot of public discourse, we sometimes, because it's exciting, it can be exciting, exhilarating, fun to show someone their flawed thinking. But if all of us were rational, logical beings, like we wouldn't have all the problems we have. And it's not enough to just say, well, people just refuse to accept the truth. Like it is the case that a purely intellectual presentation of the faith is not sufficient, right? CF, all the saints and theologians that write on this. And so I think it's very encouraging that Pope Leo, as an Augustinian, is hopefully going to continue to reclaim this. I mean, I think it's not a coincidence that Pope Francis wrote on the human heart and the divine heart. Like reclaiming the heart is really the antidote to that. And so what that means is being more self-aware and being more transparent about what, because that's how you have authentic communion with another person. Like that's how you have authentic relationship with another person, is not you sit down there and let me just explain it to you, but it's two people side by side who are looking out at the world and making sense of it, and are not afraid to admit the doubts and challenges and the struggles, and to be more of a mentor might be the wrong word for us in the English world, but like to be more of a guide and a friend who's looking out at all of these mountainous areas and these muddy areas and saying, hey, I've tried traversing those areas. Here are some paths that have helped for me. And like, what do you need to also find Jesus Christ today?
My final question to both of you is, if we look ahead at 2035, what are healthy parishes doing? How do you guys hope, they have integrated AI and some of these emerging technologies that we're starting to see the fruits of now?
Maybe something that I would love for parishes to start doing, not in 2030 or 2035, but 2026, would be providing more resources for parents. We're talking about parenting, but also just for the whole parish on how to use technology without abusing technology, right? So, the technical term would be media and artificial literacy, but being able to provide real practical resources for parents and for parishioners on how to use and not abuse artificial intelligence. So that would be something super, super helpful that parishes should be thinking about it. I think that would be one of the most welcomed resources that a parish could offer now, like not in 5 years, but now. Sometimes, if you go to an average parish, you look here in the United States, you look at the events that sometimes parishes is sponsored, and you look at the parish events calendar, and then a lot of things are poorly attended because they're not touching the things that people really care about. There are the things that the parish is pushing to others. So there's not a match of interest and need with offerings. So I would say, like if I'm a pastor and I'm, watching this podcast, if I'm a lay leader, lay minister, I would start to think about how could we create these media and artificial intelligence literacy resources, courses, conversations for the parish now, so that we're using, not abusing technology. Now the question about the future, in 5-10 years, where do we want where do we want to be? So for me, I'm going to start with the most hopeful perspective, because that's how I think about these things. Maybe this is my, I was sharing that I started in 1994 when I was in school, and that was my conversion, and emerging technologies were happening. And I could see from there to now how we're able to share the gospel in such creative ways around the world, where back in the day you needed to own a media company or work for a media company to put a message to the people, and now you can do it without that. Anybody can publish a message. So I've seen that revolution from 1994 to now, and what I see ahead is maybe three things. One is AI is going to bring the cost down for a lot of the things that right now they are very expensive to do, and that's going to promote, I think, the leveraging media and creative tools to do beautiful things that communicate the gospel message in a very effective way. And so I could see that being very important on how AI is going to change media production and communications for good. I would love in 5 years to see all the parishes leveraging AI for all the mission support things, from translations, active translations for all their parishes that are multicultural, to data analysis of the parish territory, as Edmund was saying, and understanding trends and understanding opportunities, to parish ministers that every year, the priests, the deacons, the lay episcopal ministers are getting better because they're using AI as a thought partner and a critical partner, and they're getting better at their homilies and their preaching and the catechesis and being better teachers. So I would love to see these AI tools, agents helping the parish do things better, but never substituting the human interaction and what's uniquely human. So I would love in 5 years to be a church that is confident, a church that is not afraid, a church that understands what AI is and is not, and is able to leverage and harness AI for good in a way that the Lord would be proud of us, of using these resources that He's allowed us to have at this time and this age, and that we're using it so that more people would come to know and love Him.
And Edmund, what about for you?
Yeah, I love doing this with Edmundo because it's nice. I can kind of give maybe a different, like maybe like a different take that I wouldn't have given, because I believe what Edmundo is saying, but I think the only thing I would add, I think I have like I hope it's holy, but I think I have a particular type of kind of frustration with the church. So I think I want to paint a little bit more of a cautionary picture that, the internet, I think we're going to see something very similar to what happened with the internet, where we're going to have similar patterns, but just heightened, intensified, and it's going to happen much quicker and it's going to be more intense. So the internet democratized information. The internet in some ways started decentralizing leadership and authority. And these things happen really fast. You see this boom in, moms and, stay-at-home parents and college kids starting ministries and apostolates and these things. And the parishes, the hearing of parishes during COVID that didn't have a list of any of their parishioners' email addresses was really disheartening. And things like that, parishes like that, it was a very negative, effect. It wasn't great. But I think what's really concerning is that as we move into this AI world, those types of mistakes are going to have more dire consequences, and it's going to be quicker. So there's two ideas. We're used to this idea of bell curves that, more or less there's going to be a big group of people that have about average experience of things, whether it's resources or experiences, time or information. But with AI, we're having more of what's called these power laws, where you have lots and lots of people that don't have much, and then a small percentage that have a lot. So if you think back to feudal society, where you had a small 1% of the population had access to resources and riches and all of this, and then everyone else had a much different experience. I think in my hopeful view of the future is that Catholic leaders, parish ministers, pastors don't see this as just a gimmicky tech fad, but see this as what it is, which is a revolution of society and the way we think and act and talk that forces us to be on the cutting edge of this. Like we have to be using these things, or at least like thinking about how to use these technologies. And as Pope Leo said in that same address, he said, today we find ourselves in a new culture deeply characterized and formed by technology, and it's up to us to ensure that this culture remains human. So I think what I hope to see is that we understand that this is a really, really pressing time for the church to get involved in this technological revolution. Like we can't sit on the sidelines. And all the things Edmundo said is like, I believe 100% that we are given this huge opportunity to bring the church's wisdom, hope, and confidence into these spaces, but we have to be involved in it. And we have to be involved in it yesterday. And it's exciting to be involved in it. And there is hope there. But I just really hope by 2030, we're seeing a new shift. Like we're seeing something we didn't see at the dawn of the internet age. Like we're seeing a different response and reaction from Catholics everywhere.
Edmund, thank you so much for that. Edmundo and Edmund, I'm very grateful for your time this morning. It has been a fascinating and just incredible conversation. I'm very grateful for you joining me on this, and I hope to do it again soon, sometime.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Maybe next time in Rome, we should just go out and have a
Absolutely.
little bit of, and a good conversation there.